Hello, everyone. I'm Leah Spector, Senior Brand Manager at Big Commerce. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our live show, The Big Picture, where we talk about e-commerce news and trends, speak with e-commerce experts, and more. I'm joined today by our fabulous Director of Content Marketing, Melissa Dixon. Thanks for being here, Melissa.
Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone.
Melissa and I recently attended the Youth Marketing Strategies Conference in LA, where Melissa hosted a session on reaching Gen Z with omni-channel e-commerce and really cohesive brand experiences and why that's so important in today's climate. I'm really excited for you to talk about some of those insights today, and we'll also share some of what we learned at the conference and the other sessions. We're live, so feel free to drop any comments or questions, and we'll try to get to them. All right, Melissa, let's dive in. Okay, why is it so important to understand Gen Z's beliefs, values, and ultimately shopping habits? Why should retailers and merchants care about winning with Gen Z?
Yeah, a great question. And I mean, to put it in perspective, this is a group of people that makes up about 70 plus million alone in the United States and about 2.5 billion globally. So that is about a third of the global population. And you've got the older members of Gen Z, about 25, 26, right? So they're starting to come of age and starting to leave their mark. Exactly. And we just saw the first member of Gen Z elected to Congress. His name's Maxwell Alejandro Frost. So this is happening. Gen Z is making an impact. And within the context of commerce, what's so interesting about this group is that above all else, they're digitally native, right? So they have this very distinct set of behaviors and beliefs that shapes everything about them, including their shopping habits. And what we have is this group of very complex, very savvy consumers that are essentially disrupting the market. And I was reading a Bloomberg report that says Gen Z has a collective spending power of $360 billion. So the reason it's so important for retailers and merchants is because Gen Z is the future of commerce, essentially. So brands have to rethink their traditional retail and marketing strategies.
Yeah, and you know, when we millennials were younger, that was kind of all of the rage, like millennials are disrupting, millennials are ruining every industry. It's really not ruining, it's just every generation kind of has a different point of view and a different perspective. What should retailers really keep top of mind when trying to appeal to Gen Z?
Yeah, I think a couple things. So the first thing that I would say is that brands have to be connected with Gen Z and have the right technology and tools, right? But they also can't forget about that human connection. And that's where, you know, the values come into play. But the best brands are at that intersection of technology and humanity. And when those converge, that's when Gen Z converts. So I think the thing to keep in mind is that it's not just about the platforms, it's about the people, but both are so important. And then secondly, I would say for retailers to keep top of mind, we cannot underestimate how much the market and the commerce landscape has shifted over the last couple years, right? The commerce of today is not what it was 2 years ago, a year ago, even 6 months ago. And Gen Z, more than any other generation, because they're digitally native, they crave this singular, connected, seamless, memorable brand experience. So that's where it's really, you know, it is that balance of technology and humanity. And on the technology side, I think that having a unified omni-channel strategy really becomes absolutely critical because brands need to make sure that they're connected across all of these touch points and that the experience is just entirely seamless and frictionless. You know, I think about the way that Gen Z shops and the way we shop too, but even more so with this digitally native generation. They might be discovering products on social media. They might be clicking on ads. They might go to the D2C website and compare your inventory and shipping time to that of Amazon. And then ultimately they might decide they want to go buy something in person in a brick and mortar store because they want that experience. So all of those touch points have to be connected and entirely seamless.
Well, and the TikTok made me buy it hashtag has like billions of views at this point. And I think that's pretty cool that like TikTok buying experience, it really started organically before there was like a direct integration between TikTok and BigCommerce or any of the other platforms. So I love that a platform like TikTok is really like looking and investing in how Gen Z prefers to discover products. I heard that TikTok is the most popular search engine among Gen Z at this point, which I think is so cool. Like when you're looking for something and you can see quickly like a visual kind of search result page and then do your research from there.
Yeah.
I just love how they're kind of innovating how social channels are even used.
Well, and I did see that they're piloting TikTok shops. So there was an insider intelligence article I just read that they're starting with that. So yeah, and I mean, that is really just, we're at a whole new level with social media. So that's a huge trend that's, you know, driving the landscape and where we're really seeing Gen Z sort of grasping onto that. I mean, and look at us, we're doing live video right now. Look at us. But we're seeing way more live video now.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, just back to TikTok too, the other thing that I always think of is 60% of Gen Z is on TikTok. I mean, more than half. That's a huge number.
Surprised it's not more.
Right. So I mean, the expectations with social media and now social commerce are just ever increasing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the commerce trends that are really especially relevant to Gen Z, and how is that maybe different from other generations?
Yeah, well, definitely, you know, social media and social commerce is the big one. I think another one that we're really seeing is the need for hyper personalization. You know, Gen Z is a generation that craves and values individuality, right? So personalization is critical. And what you need for that level of personalization is data. You need to know your audience and tailor your communications and your experience to them, to what they want. And that, you know, it's putting the message out there in terms of SMS, you know, push notifications, emails, product recommendations, and just that tailored experience. So that's a big one. And then also alternative payment methods. I mean, they're impacting the landscape as a whole, but we also see this skew more so with Gen Z. So of course we saw the meteoric rise of BOPUS and Boris, buy online, pick up in store, during the pandemic, and those are now staples. But we're also seeing that Gen Z wants more payment options with digital wallets, buy now, pay later. That's popular with the younger age brackets as well. So
and that makes sense if maybe they don't have as much spending power at the moment.
Yeah.
Or even a lot of younger people are credit averse too, which props to them.
Totally.
So I'm excited to see how that evolves. And more on social commerce too. Something I really admire about Gen Z is they've kind of rejected the millennial like hyper curated, superposed social media content with the super perfect influencers. And I think brands are now gearing towards smaller, more kind of like micro influencers that maybe have a smaller audience but are much more engaged. And there's research that people trust, smaller audience influencers because, even if they are getting paid to talk about a product, they know that they're going to be authentic about it.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah. And then there's another trend that's worth mentioning, which we're seeing more of these phygital experiences. Of course, the blend of physical and digital. And you see it on both ends because we're seeing more digitally native brands now like opening showrooms, right? To have that connected experience that we know Gen Z wants. And then in store, we're seeing more like QR codes, tablets, kiosks, just more technology
AR.
In store, right? And then online, of course, it's augmented reality, virtual reality, the metaverse, things like, 360 views and even virtual shopping assistance. So you're really seeing that on both sides and it's just blending. And again, it's that whole connected and cohesive experience. So you have to be plugged in and making sure you're keeping up with all of those trends. So those are some of the big ones that I see.
To comment on one of those, I think a lot of, especially Gen Z, are returning to a lot of in-store shopping experiences because, we were locked down for a while, long time, and now they're kind of craving like going out and having these experiences like with their friends and their family and just kind of seeing things in person, but there's still that really important piece of the omni-channel experience. Even if they end up going to purchase it in store, they want to look at your inventory online, make sure that if you're Sephora, make sure they have the trending concealer they saw on TikTok,
right?
And they want to go try it on in person and speak to a Sephora expert and purchase from there.
Yeah, exactly. So in person matters more than ever, but it has to be an elevated, tailored in-person experience
and highly connected to your e-commerce platform.
Absolutely.
How can brands connect with Gen Z on an emotional level? We kind of started to talk a bit about it.
Yeah, my favorite topic, empathetic marketing.
Yes.
Which is really just, customer-centric marketing.
Right. It's been around, right? It's not anything that different.
Not new, but the reason why I think it's so important with Gen Z and what a lot of other experts will say is this is, again, back to the digitally native thing. This is a generation that has seen a lot. These are kids and young adults that have grown up exposed to, political, social, cultural, environmental, all of these things, and they see that. And so, there is research too, interestingly, that shows that Gen Z, I'm citing Hannah Ben Shabbat, who's a Gen Z expert, who I follow, I'm a fan of.
She's been on the podcast.
She's been on our Make It Big podcast.
Episode.
And she has research that shows that Gen Z is inherently distrusting of brands and corporations, perhaps because of that overexposure, right? Mm-hmm. So it's almost like these, retailers have to essentially go out of their way and make this concerted effort to say we are trustworthy and build that emotional connection and start to say, no, we are authentic, you can trust our brand. So it's about, doing that. It's all about putting yourself in their shoes. I mean, first of all, it's literally going through the shopping experience on every channel. What pain points do you encounter? Well, those are the pain points that your shoppers are encountering, so resolve them. And becoming a good listener too, listen to the data, and that data comes in so many forms, right? It comes in the form of, conducting surveys. It comes in the form of social posts, see what they're saying on social media, what are they saying to your customer support teams, and just gleaning insights there and taking them and applying them to add value. So it's really that building the emotional connection that builds that brand loyalty and builds the trust. So, you do that by understanding them, putting yourself in their shoes, and then adding the value and solving their problems. And a key part of that too is understanding those Gen Z specific values, right?
What are some of those?
Yeah, so there's authenticity and individuality are the biggest ones, definitely. And that's where, Gen Z, they want brands to show up and in a real and honest and authentic way. And that goes back to that, trust issues, I suppose. But, that's our job as retailers and marketers to build that trust. So it needs to be especially focused with Gen Z. And that's where influencer marketing comes into play, right? So it's not as much about celebrities with them and more about maybe those micro influencers and brand ambassadors and now nano influencers even saying that. And then with the individuality component, that's where we start to see the true need for personalization and that data. And also another thing that's tied into that individuality and authenticity, keep in mind that Gen Z is the most racially and ethnically diverse group, right? It's 48% of them identify as minorities as compared to it's 39% for millennials. So the most diverse so far, and we know that they value inclusivity and they want to see themselves in advertising. So that is paramount, being able to inject that into your retail strategy. So those are really the big ones.
And on that note, even beyond representation, that's where I think Gen Z want to see more than just, people featured in advertising campaigns. But
Yeah.
I think they are really passionate about, okay, is your company business practices, like, do you employ fair wages and
Absolutely.
benefits? And do you have a diverse range of, executives and management team? So I think thinking about like what strengths your brand has in some of these areas and infusing that into your story, whether it's on your website, content, blog, all of that, can be really powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that reminds me too of there's another value of consuming consciously,
Yep.
which is tied to sustainability, of course, but it's also this sort of dual meaning of consuming consciously in the sense of price and value. Because again, it's a younger generation. Yes, they are gaining spending power, but a lot of them are still young and, living with their parents. So price and value are definitely a factor too.
Absolutely. And one kind of combination I want to bring up for a tactic of, I think it's both like personalization, individuality, and like authentic marketing, is giving Gen Z a chance for their voices to be heard. Like if you want feedback on a product design, or you want to, run a campaign on social media where Gen Z is helping you design a new product.
Absolutely.
Or, they really value that stuff because they feel like their voices are being heard. And actually Spotify has a Culture Next report where like the majority of Gen Z, they see themselves as creators and they want to be creators.
Yeah.
I think that's like the number one, younger Gen Z dream job is, being a YouTuber, an influencer. So feeling like their voices are being heard and they're having a kind of collaborative, creative partnership with the brand, that's like gold.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that when I first started kind of studying Gen Z, that was one of the first things that really stuck with me, that I was like, oh, this is really how they're different than millennials.
Yep.
As an elder millennial, I see this difference where it's so fascinating. Like they do view themselves as brand ambassadors. Mm-hmm. They select these brands and they are the brand. So it's just a totally different mindset that we haven't seen that before, with a whole generation.
And like one more note on that, like brand safety in the social media space, it's kind of flipped on its head a bit. There's an amazing TikTok creator who kind of parodies company logos and brands. And maybe, when we were younger, brands would kind of flip out about that and, not want to see their brand kind of morph.
Yeah.
But now brands have totally jumped on it.
Embraced it,
and they like want this TikTok creator to redesign their logos in really kind of funny ways, because that's that like authentic content and connection that can be really hard to just, spin up out of thin air. It has to be organic.
Yeah, and that, I mean, what I take from that too is just the need to adapt. It's the need for retailers and brands to really adapt. And it's not like you have to upend your strategy overnight, but starting by understanding this audience and, understanding the gravity of the situation where, like we said, a third of the global population, these are the future customers. These are your current and future customers. So being able to adapt is just so crucial. And I mean, we've seen, even forget about what generation you're talking about, that need for agility and brands to adapt is something that, we've all been faced with these monumental shifts in the landscape over the last couple of years.
One of my favorite panels, besides yours, of course, at YMS LA, were actually a panel full of, Gen Z people themselves, not just, marketers from brands who are marketing to Gen Z, but we got the chance to ask Gen Z some questions and like really, kind of pick their brain on some of these things. And one of the men, it was the smartest thing I heard all day. I think it was like, if you're trying to connect with Gen Z, like, don't pander to us and don't create these kind of like, again, like faux authentic, kind of contrived brand scenarios. Like, just speak to them like human beings and involve them like in your brand however you can, without being over the top about it. Because again, they can really suss out when you're not being yourself and unique and authentic.
I mean, they are essentially our savviest shoppers yet. And I can't remember the exact data point, but I do know, they're on track to be the most educated generation yet. So I mean, these are these are smarties.
Yeah.
Like, talk to them like real intelligent people.
Absolutely. Okay, so what brands are doing this well? Who's really connecting with Gen Z?
Okay, so my very favorite example is a big commerce merchant, but also I do shop this brand, Bliss.
Shout out to Bliss.
Yes, shout out Bliss, health and beauty. And here's why I love this example so much, because they have really evolved over the years. And I remember when I was like in my 20s, and Bliss was sort of this luxury brand, and they had all their spas, and they would be in like boutique hotels, and I thought it was so cool, but of course it was out of my pay range, And so so Bliss recognized that, right? So in 2016, they had a new CEO come on, and part of her whole strategy, which I love, was to target millennials and Gen Z by making that luxury quality more accessible. So of course they did, an actual design rebrand and update and refresh things to look more youthful, but the really key components of the strategy were, one, cutting prices significantly, and two, expanding retail distribution to Target, Ulta, Urban Outfitters,
Walgreens,
CVS,
yeah.
Walgreens, right? And now you see Bliss everywhere, and that's a good thing because it's more attainable to this generation. So it's really about the channels, but then also here's the other thing they did to really sort of tap into the values. They really doubled down on TikTok.
Yeah.
So
their TikTok
again,
is strong. Check them out on TikTok.
But they did stuff like in 2020 they launched this campaign where it was all about supporting the Trevor Project, which is a youth-focused nonprofit, LGBTQ rights, And so they had beauty influencers doing TikTok lives, and they were donating money to the Trevor Project, and became very active on TikTok, and it's now become an annual thing that they do. So I think that is a really strong example of, again, being plugged into the right channels, but then also tapping into the values. So I love that one.
You know what I love about that example is before Bliss kind of rebranded and they were really more through like luxury spas, when we were younger, marketing was very aspirational. Marketing was kind of telling us what we should be or what we should aim for, and we're the brand that can help you do that. Now I think it's so shifted to brands and marketing really being the strongest when the message is like, we're meeting you right where you
Exactly.
are. You're perfect how you are. Like, it's not, we're trying to sell you something because we think you should be better, but just because we think you should treat yourself. Or this is, just walking them through how to, find who they are in the world.
Yeah, well, that also reminds me of the one example that we saw at YMS in LA. Do you remember when we watched, there was the woman from Marriott talking about the multiple brands within, the umbrella group, and it's Moxie, right? Is the hotel that's geared more toward Gen Z, and it's a cool concept. I haven't been in one, but I loved.
I stayed in one.
You
actually.
did?
Yeah.
Okay. And so the deal is like it's not all about the rooms; it's about the communal spaces because they know these people want to socialize more, right? But I loved the message that she was saying. She was like, "That's the brand for Gen Z," and we build that loyalty with this age group with that product early on, and then we know they're going to graduate and they're going to want to stay at different hotels within our group. So it's all about, like you're saying, it's understanding we know where you are at this stage in life, and we embrace that, and we have something for you, and then it also just goes back to giving people options, and that's that's what's behind an omni strategy in the first place. Meet them where they are, give them the options, let them choose. You don't need to dictate where they make their purchase. Be available at every touch point.
Soundbite right there.
Yeah.
That's great. Any other brands you want to bring up?
Well, there were a couple that I talked about in my presentation at YMS that were interesting. I liked the Fortnite was a good one because they, and I didn't know too much about Fortnite before I started digging in, but the specific example was the Fortnite and Balenciaga collaboration, which I thought was cool. And And when I started to read more about Fortnite, I saw that they do all of these like cross-cultural collaborations to like stay relevant. So they have like, it's sort of bringing in the phygital component too. Like there's in-game concerts with like Ariana Grande and stuff like that. So they're really tapping into the phygital. And with the Balenciaga collab, they created a digital collection that was sold in the Fortnite shop and then also in limited run in Balenciaga stores, select stores. So stuff like that, you know.
That's super cool. Speaking of gaming, are there any specific industries that really capture Gen Z's interest maybe more than other generations?
Yeah, and there's like, you know, there's tons of data on this. One of the reports that I've been looking at recently is this Morning Consult report that has the top 40 brands, and then it kind of breaks down within other demographics. And so gaming and entertainment, right? According to this report, the top 3 overall brands with Gen Z are YouTube, Google, and Netflix. And then there's also like Pixar and Apple, and so those are huge across women and men. And then also, this was really interesting to me, and I think this kind of is evidence of like the younger age group, but food and beverage, like it was like half of the brands on that list were food and beverage. It was like M&M's, Oreo, Kit Kat, Doritos, Gatorade, which is interesting. I mean, that's valid. And, you know, food and beverage e-commerce is, you know, it's on the rise. So that's notable. And then when you start to dig into more demographics within that, if they're looking at women and men, you start to see it deviate a little where male Gen Z is heavier on like sports, even more so on the gaming, and then you'll start to see with women more health and beauty. So like #1 brand affinity for Gen Z among women, I think it was like Ulta.
Okay.
There's Elf, Sephora, you know. So those are the big industries, and then of course, I mean, fashion is big with Gen Z as well. So.
What I'm excited to keep my eye on is how all of these industries are really converging in especially like Web3 spaces.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see how that world is going to evolve. Like, I know from some of our report, which we're going to talk about, people, especially Gen Z, they're the most willing to be in the metaverse, shop in the metaverse, and they want both physical and digital products. So why don't we get into that? Earlier this year, we launched our Global Consumer Trends Report, and we have a section kind of on Gen Z specifically because we wanted to learn more. What from that report do you think retailers should know?
The thing that stood out to me the most was that it was over 90%, I believe it was 92% of Gen Z said that sustainability was either very important or important. So it's important to nearly all of them. And this study, just for the benefit of the audience, was it was global, and it was 4,000 respondents across the U.S., U.K., Australia, Europe, Canada, and Europe. So not strictly Gen Z, but there was a component of Gen Z within that study. So 92% of the Gen Z respondents said sustainability was important. And then what I found that's really interesting too, you kind of have to dig into that, because we also asked them, okay, if sustainability is important, how are you willing to support that with brands, right? And, by paying more, or, getting your package delivered a few days later, like we've seen that with, Prime.
Yeah.
And not surprisingly, paying more was not at the top of the list, but respondents were willing to get things, at a later date, maybe extend the shipping time frame or pick things up in store. So it is trending that way, and this is a value. It goes back to that consuming consciously. So that's another one. And then of course the metaverse point that you hit on. It was over half of Gen Z willing to shop the metaverse. And by the way, I just saw Nike is launching their first full Web3 store called Swoosh.
Yes.
And it said that the first collection was going to be in January. So I'm excited to keep my eye on that and see what happens. But yeah, I mean, that was another big one. And then I'm trying to think if there was, those were really the big Gen Z ones. And then I also can speak to other data too. Again, going back to some of the data that I love from my fave, Hannah Ben Shabbat. Her book, by the way, is called Gen Z 360. If anyone is interested, dive into that topic, because she also goes into Gen Z in the workforce, which is really interesting for brands to consider. So there's data that she has, and I've seen this reflected elsewhere too, is that Gen Z predominantly makes purchasing decisions based on family and friends. Like those are the biggest, most influential components.
Number one, word of mouth.
Yeah, and celebrity and traditional advertising are like all the way at the bottom of the list. So that's an interesting takeaway too. And then the one that we kind of touched on this too, but another one I always think of is that over 90% of Gen Z uses social media to discover products.
Yep, going back to TikTok and other channels, really.
That's huge.
One thing I want to point out about the sustainability where it's so tricky is like millennial or Gen Z, maybe they're not at the point yet where they can afford to spend more on a product because it's made sustainably or because the packaging is more sustainable. But I can bet that as they come of age, they will want to spend more on that. And so I think that's why it's so key for, again, brands to stay agile and connected to their audiences, because preferences are going to shift and change as anyone grows up.
Absolutely.
And, just gets more experience or, more spending power. They're more present in the workforce. So lots to keep an eye on.
Well, and we've talked about, not to get too deep into it, but, we talked about it at during my session with, I've heard it pronounced Shine and Shein.
Yes.
So not sure which the true pronunciation is, but that fast fashion brand is extremely popular with Gen Z and is
some of the worst
under fire.
Practices.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of articles out there right now. So that's a direct conflict with the data and the practice that I think we will start to see that shake out over time. And you're exactly right. It's the values and the practices will change as this group comes of age and as more of them enter the workforce and have more buying power.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for sticking around. This has been a really great conversation. We have one more question for you as we get into the holiday season. Do you have any predictions for what adult Gen Zers will spend on versus where they'll save?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I think that it's probably going to be those categories we talked about. I mean, I don't know if they're all going to buy candy and Doritos, but we'll see.
Probably.
Gaming, entertainment, fashion. But of course, inflation and the threat of recession are the big variables this year. So that remains to be seen. But what we do know is that people are shopping earlier, they're shopping more channels, and they are using more payment methods, alternative payment methods. So we've already started to analyze the data for this holiday season and for big commerce merchants, and we're seeing that with our September and October data as compared to last year, where we're seeing the numbers spike as early as September. The holiday season just keeps getting extended, and I'm really excited to report on this after Cyber Week and really get into the numbers. But we've also seen a spike in October already in alternative payment methods like buy now, pay later. That's already up for October compared to last year. And then the other thing we saw explosive growth in marketplaces and social commerce with our big commerce merchants last year. And we're already seeing those numbers start to go up in October too.
Okay, that's super interesting. I can't wait to see more of that data because I have a hypothesis, it's really not that crazy, but that Black Friday, Cyber Monday as these like big, 2-day shopping events, like it's going to spread out more and more over those, that week, the 2-3 weeks, if not longer. So excited to revisit that data with you once we have that after the holiday.
Yeah, me too. I enjoy talking about this. So I'll be back to share more soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us today. This has been a great conversation.
Yes, it has. Thank you, Leah.
And thanks, everyone, for watching. Stay tuned, and we'll be back in a couple weeks to share these Cyber Week results. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks.